All right, here's some questions to help review for the final exam. This first one, we're having to solve an inequality. And you solve these the same way as you solve any kind of an equation. You just have to remember, if you divide by a negative, you switch that sign. So I'm going to move the x's to the left, and I'm going to leave the minus 14, and move the plus 70 over. Subtracting these, I get negative 7x, and on this side, I think I get 56. Now, when I divide both sides by negative 7, because I'm dividing by a negative, I have to switch that inequality sign. So this would be x. Instead of greater than or equal to, it would be less than or equal to. And then when you divide that, you get negative 8. Okay, a couple other questions. You're asked to factor this. So you can factor that first one in a number of different ways. You can use the AC method. I like using the guess and check method. And so I'm just going to put two brackets. To get 3x squared, I can put a 3x here and an x there. To get 42, I can use a 6 and a 7. So I'm thinking maybe a 6 there and a 7 there. And I'm just guessing and checking. Now, for signs, I don't know. Let's maybe use a plus here and a minus there. Okay, so now let's check. This times this, 3x squared. This times this would be a plus 18x. This times this is a minus 7x. This times this is a minus 42. When I collect these, it gives me an 11x. That's what I'm supposed to get. Therefore, this is correctly factored. This one here is a sum of two things that are cubed. And I like to rewrite what the cubes are. So 125 is 5 cubed. So that'll be 5s all cubed plus, and then 1 would just be 1 cubed. Because 1 times 1 times 1 is still just 1. The rule for solving that, which you'd be given on a test, not solving, but for factoring, is this. That should be AB plus B squared. Okay, so I have to figure this out, and I just replace A with what A is. So in this case here, I've got to do a little bracket and then a big bracket. So I'll have 5s plus 1. And then here I have to get 5s squared. So that'll be 25s squared. And then here they multiply by each other. So 5s times 1 would just be 5s plus, and then here it'll just be b, which is this number, 1 squared, would just be 1. Done. Okay, this one says find all numbers for which this is not defined. So I don't have to really look at the top. I guess I could factor the top if I wanted to. It's a difference of squares, so that would be it. And then I factor the bottom. So two things that multiply to 24 and add to negative 5. I'm thinking negative 8 and a plus 3. So they say find all numbers for which this rational expression is not defined. And that means getting a 0 on the bottom, because you can't divide by 0. And so they're saying whatever you plug in there or there, you better not come up with a 0 for it. So for this one here, x minus 8, if I put an 8 in there, that would not be good, because 8 take away 8 is 0. You can't have a 0 on the bottom. So the numbers, so 8 is one of the numbers for which this expression is not defined. And the other number would be negative 3. Okay. Now, this is one way of asking that question. They could also ask the question and say, what is the domain of that function? So the domain is a slightly different question. For this one, they say, what numbers is this not defined? Well, 8 doesn't work, neither does negative 3, so you can't use those numbers. If they say, what is the domain? You can say, well, you can use all the x's as long as x is not equal to 8 or negative 3. So if they're asking for the domain, that's what you would say. Okay, the next question, simplify. Same thing, I need to factor. So the top is another difference of squares. And the bottom, things that multiply to 64 and add to 16. I'm thinking 8 and an 8. Oh, now these are the same, and so I can cancel those. That's a factor of 1. And so I'll be left with that. The next question, you're dividing a monomial into a trinomial up top. And so this is a common denominator, so it's common. So I could just rewrite this equation like this because it's common. 30x8 over 10x squared plus 20x to the fourth over 10x squared. We often just do that in our head. It's not a bad idea to write it out and then divide each one. So this would be 4x to the 8th. 30 divided 10 is 3. x8 divided x squared, I've got to subtract exponents. So it'd be x to the 6th plus 20 divided 10 is 2, and then x squared. And I would leave it like that. I guess you could factor out a common factor of x squared, but they just wanted you to divide. I'd leave it like that. Okay, multiply and simplify. So I've got two common radicals, so if I multiply, I can just put them both underneath the radical sign. 7m to the 13th, and then simplify. Now 14 is the same as 2 times 7, right? m5, 7, m13. So if I'm simplifying radical, two things the same inside, I can bring one out. So here's 2 7s, so I can bring 1 7 out. And then inside, I'll just be left with a 2. And then altogether, I've got, I'll just do another step here. I've got 18 m's. So for every 2 m's, I can bring one out. So I think I can bring out 9 m's, and I'll just be left with a 2 inside. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, solve round to the nearest thousandth. This one, first thing I'd try and do is factor it. But if you try and factor it, it actually doesn't work. So in order to solve that, you need to use the quadratic formula. So that's this. So minus something plus or minus b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So b is this number, 9. Another b. Okay, a is the number in front of the x squared, so that's just a 1. And c is the last number, so negative 42. And a is 1 again. So if I simplify that, I get negative 9 plus or minus 81 plus 168, I think that is, all over 2. So it's minus 9 plus or minus, if I add that, I think it's square root of 249 all over 2. And then what you do is you plug that in your calculator. So when you plug it in your calculator, you'll get 3 point something, and I think negative 12 point something. I just did that question, so the numbers are fairly fresh in my mind. But you do it on your calculator, and then they want you to round to the nearest 3 decimal places. Okay, this is the question here. So I'm doing 2 on the same page. Maybe I'll change my color. Let's go magenta. Okay, so this says determine the nature of the solutions. And we can do that using part of the quadratic formula that's underneath the radical. And what happens is if I do that stuff under the radical, and if it's greater than 0, that means there's 2 real zeros. If that stuff under the radical is equal to 0, then there's only 1 real 0. And if the stuff underneath the radical is less than 0, or in other words negative, that's when I get 2 non-real zeros. So let's figure out what the b squared minus 4ac is. Okay, so a is 1, that goes here. B is 3, that goes here. And c is an 8, that goes there. So 3 squared is 9, 4 times 8 is 32. So if I subtract those, I get negative 23. Negative number, that means it's got to be that one right there. So I'd say there's 2 non-real zeros. If you were to graph that, you'll see that the graph goes something like that, but it doesn't come down and cross like this one. The graph would cross both. This one, it would just come down and touch once and go back. and this two non-real ones looks like that. Okay, next question, more quadratic stuff. Projectile thrown upward, this is its function. So they say maximum height. As soon as I see maximum, I think vertex. So what I need to do is use, to get the x value of the vertex, I need to go minus b over 2a. And to get the y value of the vertex, I'm going to take whatever I got from this one and plug it into the function. So it'll be minus 14 times whatever I get squared plus 364 times whatever I get from the first step. Okay, so let's do this. Minus b all over 2 times a. So, what's b? B is this number, so 364. And then a is negative 14. So I'm going to get negative 364 over negative 28. So the negatives will cancel. And now just 364 divided 28. What's that come out to? 364 divided 28. Oh, comes out even. Good, like that. 13. Good. So that is the time that the thing reaches its maximum height. So that's the answer to this question, is 13. And then they say, what's the maximum height? That's when I plug 13 in here. So 13 squared is 169. Just do this on your calculator, whatever 364 times 13 is. Figure this out, and that'll tell you what the height of that rocket is. Okay, the next question deals with a quadratic inequality. And they're basically saying, when is this stuff less than 0? So if I look at it graphically, maybe the function looks, I don't know, something like this. They're saying, what is this part here when it's below the x-axis, where y is less than 0? Okay, so what I can do with it is I can factor it. Then I know where it crosses the x-axis. So I have an x and an x. I'm thinking minus 5 and plus 2. So if I were to graph this at a positive 5 right there, and at a negative 2 right there, that's where the graph crosses. So it looks something like that. So the question says, when is this thing below the x-axis? That's what that's asking. So it happens in between negative 2 to 5. So they want interval notation, so you would say something like the interval would be the smallest number is minus 2, and the top number is 5. And it can't equal those numbers because that's where it crosses. And there's no equal sign up here, like less than or equal to. So this would be my interval. All right, hopefully that helps you with those few review questions.